Welcome to the Journey of an Aesthete podcast, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human. Horenstein.
How you doing?
It's great to hear your voice and finally talk with you.
Yeah, good to hear you. Yeah. I do have Skype. I'm not sure I know how to use it, but I got it.
Well, we're using it right now. Your voice sounds great, and this is everything we would want for the episode, so we're all set to go.
Do you want to talk on the phone? Or
we're doing it right now. We're doing this is the episode.
Oh, so this is a Skype call as opposed to, okay. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
It's beautiful. I usually say a little bit about the guest up front, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Just a little bit. There are guests on the show that I know personally, and you would count as one of those, of course. And then there are guests I've never met. But what unites all the guests is that they're all excellent at what they do, and they often do many things, not just one thing, in the arts. And you certainly are an example of somebody that's a master photographer, but also has done many, many kinds of things. And usually on this show, I like to do a linear chronology where, a guest will talk about their personal biography and how they came to be the artists they are. And in that linear flow, nonlinear things will happen, reminiscences and, memories and reflections and ideas and all that will come up to the surface, bubble up to the surface. So, Henry, do you mind going back and talking about your story?
No, what do you want? You want me just to talk, or you want?
Yeah, just how you
ask the question.
Well, we could do both ways. We could do both ways. I was thinking, I was quite surprised when I discovered that you study with E.P. Thompson.
Yes, I did. I went to England to do that, just to study with him. That's why I went.
That's really remarkable. I mean, because, of course, as you know, I read the Making of the English Working Class, I think, in the early 80s.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And
that's why I went. My teacher in Chicago, I studied history originally, and he said, you got to go and study with this guy. He was a friend of, they were friends,
mm-hmm.
But, I'd read the book in his class in Chicago. So I said, okay. And I went.
So I'm guessing this would have been in the 1970s, right? You in England.
It was 1967. 67. Yep.
Wow.
Much earlier. Yeah, much earlier.
Do you mind talking a little bit about 67 in England? A little bit? That's quite a time.
Well,
just anything.
Well, it was the school was in Coventry, so it's about 2 hours from London. It was not London.
Okay.
It was a quiet town, University of Warwick. Mm-hmm. He had been given an appointment as a labor to set up a labor history, the Department of Labor History. He wasn't really an academic. He was he had 1 foot in academia and 1 foot in cultural criticism.
Yep.
Kind of thing. He was more like a state intellectual, not a state intellectual, but a British intellectual.
Oh, sure.
Who taught sometimes and lectured a lot and wrote, of course. So, and his brother was very interesting too. I don't know if you know that whole story, but he was a communist who was killed. I used to know more about this. I got to wiki it to really learn it, but I think it was Frank Thompson, and he was killed in Romania or Bulgaria, someplace in Eastern Europe, with some partisans, some communist partisans.
That's right.
Anyway, he was an interesting character. I wasn't disappointed in Thompson. He was fabulous. But I was disappointed with the system because we only met every other week or so with the teacher. I didn't get as much of him as I wanted, I guess, but he was wonderful. And I did go to London every weekend.
Yeah.
And I was, I came from, I didn't come from rural. I came from New Bedford, Massachusetts, but it was a small town in a lot of ways. And I wasn't very, I wasn't very smart about the world, I guess you'd say. So if I had been, I probably would have gotten more out of that British thing, Yeah. But I did know the music, and I went to hear music in clubs. I saw Who and the Traffic, and
wow,
even Gladys Knight and the Pips. I always liked folk music. There was a band called Pentangle that started up around there, and I used to go every Sunday night and see them. Bert Jansch and who was the other guy? Mixing him up with the incredible string band, Robin Williamson. No, I'll come up with it. But, so I did go hear music, and I was definitely into that, and the politics of the time, of course. But one of my last weeks there, I went to a demonstration in London, and I was just getting into photography then. I was just starting,
Wow.
And I was loving it. And I ran into this old girlfriend of mine from Chicago at this huge demonstration in London, and we were talking and everything, and I told her I said I was going to be a photographer or something like that. And she said, "Oh yeah, well, good luck with that." She blew me off. It was funny. So
well, little did she know you would become
little did she know.
Not only just a photographer, but one of the great photographers. It's just so funny. It
flattered me more. I like it.
Well, no, it's weird. It's just weird to me. It just goes to show you have to. Everybody has an opinion, right? She was expressing her opinion, and but that's all. But I don't want to get too far ahead, because I would imagine if you're going to demonstrations and living in England, what was well, first I want to ask one more question about Thompson. What was Thompson like in terms of his style of just teaching, or how he talk about a text or whatever, or anything that comes to mind before we move on from Thompson?
Well, he was informal, he gave a proper lecture, but he was funny, and, he wasn't dry. He was a very engaging guy, I guess you'd say. Great guy. I think, but, definitely a great teacher and writer and historian,
What would you say to audiences that aren't familiar with him, his contribution to the left in general was, and to British history in particular, if you had off the top of your head, if you had to?
Well, he and Hobsbawm, I guess, and a couple of others were part of that new left thing that was, that was popular in the 60s and 70s. I don't know if I don't know. I can't really answer the question. He was very influential then. People still know him now, even, I remember being in a bar and watching the Red Sox in New York City one night, and I was sitting next to a guy. We were just chatting. He taught at Clarke, I think, and we were just chatting. And when I told him I studied with Thompson, he was like, "Oh my God," he was a historian too, and so people. And he wasn't an old guy particularly, so he wouldn't have known him at the time. He would have been probably a kid, and not a historian yet. But anyway, I don't know. It's the times. The times he was very appropriate for the times, let's say. But that's what we were like then.
Well, I know that your early photographs, I know I have copies of them in my home. Copies of a woman in Massachusetts, in sort of an apartment, and also your early book, Family Relations, and your book, Histories about the 70s. I think that's kind of that same time period. But how?
Well, a little early. A little after, because I was supposed to graduate from Chicago in '69,
Wow.
But I got thrown out in '69 in the winter. Before I was going to graduate.
When you say you got thrown out in '69, you had a very 1969 experience of Chicago, right?
Yeah, I got expelled along with 40 other people with demonstrations and so forth.
Wow.
So anyway, that was then, and then I was playing. I took a workshop with Minor White. I took a summer school course at Harvard Summer School, Photo One, with Arthur Siegel, who was part of the Bauhaus crowd in Chicago. And of course, I didn't know any of that at all. I just was like, oh, this is a camera and this is a darkroom. And then I decided to go to school. Back to school. I went to RISD. Sorry, my voice isn't that great. I did an undergrad degree and then a graduate degree, and got out of there in '73. And that's when I was making those family pictures.
That's so interesting. That's so interesting because I guess our connection, of course, well, RISD, I know you as a professor at RISD. More so than you being a student at RISD. So that's interesting.
I'm still there.
That's excellent.
But I was a student originally. I left for about 8 years and taught at Harvard. I taught at UMass Boston. Wow. I stopped teaching. I worked for Polaroid for a couple of years, and then I went back to teaching in the early 80s at RISD, part-timer.
Yeah, I guess that makes two people that I've known fairly well that taught at RISD. The other, of course, is the late Richard Merkin, who was a friend of mine.
Right, and a friend of mine. In fact, he's the only art I've ever bought is two prints, two paintings, I should say, that he made. Yeah, Richard was one of a kind. He's fabulous. I can see his influence on your style of dress.
Oh, absolutely. 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 Well, I'm carrying on his tradition in that sense. And he was a very... Yeah. What do you want to say to those... Again, not all audiences would know Richard Merkin or who he was. What would you... Just speak a little bit about his style and what he did in painting. Anything that comes to mind? Or
Well, the big reason I like it is that his themes are basically... themes of social history,
That's right.
Jazz, blues, musicians, baseball. Mm-hmm. He did a children's book on the Negro League, illustrated it. Someone else might have written it. And, of course, he did a lot of work for the New Yorker, and, but he dressed very stylishly, almost, I can't even say it. My father used to dress like Richard and you.
I know you said that. I know you said that that's the case. But so do you? Of course, Richard was a different generation. No.
Yeah. Yes. How old would Richard be now? If
oh goodness,
he was. Let me check. He might be close to 90.
That's right.
And my father would be, the generation above him, because. Yeah. My father was born in 1913, I think. So
wow.
So Merkin probably was born in the 20s.
That's right.
No, wrong. 1938. He was younger than I thought, and he died at 71.
He did. Yeah. I mean, he died fairly recently. I mean, I sort of feel like
2009. It says.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia.
I sort of feel like that's interesting. So he was an example of a baby boomer, I guess. Whose style was
on the edge,
but whose style was very anti-boomer or non-boomer, right?
Right.
And that's what's interesting. His style was right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
He was very rebellious, I think, in his feelings about art and about things in general. But he was also a stylish guy. He was a friend of Tom Wolfe's.
That's right.
Worked for, I think, wrote for GQ or Vanity Fair. I'm not sure.
He had a column for Gentleman's Quarterly for much of the 80s.
Yeah,
which is a pretty good gig if you think about it.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, a lot of illustration for the New Yorker. And, but he was a one-of-a-kind kind of guy, I would say. They also, it says here in Wiki that he was fascinated by the 20s and 30s, which, I was too, and gangster culture and, all that stuff. And I still love that stuff. I never got the dressing down, but maybe because my father had it.
Right.
But,
it's
also a different time,
Yeah, it's a different, people have to, dress is a very personal thing, of course. And there aren't any rules about dress. If you want to be a casual person, that's certainly, certainly respectable. And I don't think, again, there aren't really any rules. I guess part of living in a democratic society is people can choose what they want to do. And there isn't this commandment from on high. Hopefully there isn't a commandment from on high telling you what to do or how to dress or what to eat or any of the rest of it.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, let's hope not. Although some people do want to try to do that, unfortunately. That's a whole other topic. But what I'm wondering about you in particular is the incredible, I don't know how else to put it, diversity of style in your photography. It's really something. You have.
Yeah. Yeah, good. I'm sorry.
You have photographs that are rather abstract, and sometimes your portraits of, say, the burlesque dancers in show are really kind of very modern and abstract. And then you have other but what I was going to say is that
that's fair. Yeah.
But then you have other photographs that are less abstract and more, you might say, more figural and more about environment or landscape. And it's that diversity that I find fascinating. I'm said too much, but you probably will speak about it.
No, I think most of the way I shoot is a similar style, but I have gone off and had midlife crises and this and that.
Okay.
So it's done different things. But I think my style is pretty straightforward and, for the most part, I don't know. I don't really think about it much. I came from history. I didn't come from art. So, and it makes a huge difference to me because I think when I look at a subject, I'm looking at it for more than, light and color and, framing and all of this. I look at all of that, but I'm more interested in what the subject's saying and, the narrative, if there is one, or what they represent, or if they're silly, or if they're, I don't know. It's just a different, it's a different thing than I think a lot of people who are trained in the art world. I want to present something like, say, an artist did, or like Ouija did, or, August Sander, all those people who are huge influences for me. Where they just, you just show them as they are, and maybe with a little humor and a little quirk or a little something if it's appropriate or if it's natural to them. But I'll be honest, I don't really think as much. We go through school, and I'm sure when I was in school, I talked and participated in crits and all of that. And I do now with the students because they want that, and that's what's. Why be in school? But I think when I go on shoot, I don't think of any of that stuff.
Right.
I think that's an interesting subject, and I'll just knock it down the best I can.
Yeah. Well, I'm not. My question wasn't meant to suggest that anybody should think about any of those things, and I certainly didn't mean to suggest that you're not consistent. Certainly, but there's a breadth there, and I guess. Let me try to formulate it a little better. You're country and western musicians, and you've done enormous amount of chronicling of country and western music. Take that as an example. You say you come from history, so I guess what I'm saying is that I don't know what comes to mind. You told me once that you had worked with Gary Winogrand.
Well, I spent 3 or 4 days with him when I worked for Polaroid.
And
they had me when they had a new film or a new product, they would have budget to produce photographs or something that had to do with that project or that product. And so they had a new product, they had a new film or something, and they hired Gary Winogrand to go to Venice Beach. I think he was living in California then. He lived in Texas for a while, but I think he lived in California, LA area, and shoot. And then so they sent me out there to, I guess feed him film.
Wow.
Because he didn't need much assisting. He used an SX70 camera to make the pictures. So that's why I was out there. Basically.
Yeah, I only mention that because he's one of my favorite photographers, and I remember that you. And I'm just thinking about the differences in photographers and how they approach things. And I think.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. I'm sure you have a lot to say about that. But.
Well, not so much really. I was saying, he's enormously popular, still, which surprises me a little bit, to be honest.
Okay.
Style of working and so forth is a little out of fashion, which doesn't bother me, but it just surprises me a little bit, that people love him so much. I've got 2 or 3 Polaroids I made of him when I was out there, and I've posted them a couple of times on my Instagram, and they get a lot of hits, a lot, surprising number almost. So anyway, that's neither here nor there, but he's still very, very popular, as you know.
Yeah.
The Print Center is in Philadelphia is selling at an auction a couple of his prints, and I looked today. The low it wasn't a bid, but it's like the bottom price. They had no bids yet as of today, but it was $1,100. I was thinking, Jesus, if I collected photographs, which I don't, I would probably grab a couple of those. But so it's just a hint to you if you're interested.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting. Any artist or anytime an artist, especially an artist working in your, how do I put this? Working at your level, has a whole bunch of conscious things that are going into what you do. And it's often very hard to articulate, isn't it? I mean, of course, especially to an outsider like myself who doesn't know anything about fashions. I mean, you said there were changing fashions. So, I mean, I don't know what those are, and maybe you'd want to speak about that or not.
Well, I think photographs, the art world, anyway, the photo art world is more interested in conceptual things, and they're not interested in documentary because it's, they think that people should only photograph themselves, or their own culture, all of that.
That strikes me as very weird, though, as an idea, right?
Well, absolutely, I agree with you, but that's the way the art world has gone. Anyway, it's become very. To me, it's art used to be about nonconformity, and now. To me, it's more the other thing. But I try to participate. I have shows. I sell work. Thank you. You know that. I try to get my work into collections, and I've had some success with that in institutional museums and so forth. So I'm very interested in that, of course. But mostly I'm interested in making the work and doing books.
Yeah, that's what's important. Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that interest is why the work is what it is. That you're focused on what's important, I guess, is what I was trying to say. And when I was talking about the diversity of your subjects, you've done, again, saloon singers, country and western singers, burlesque dancers, and then some of your work is just landscape or just not figural at all, or just places.
Well, they're all cultures or subcultures or communities, whatever you want to call it, burlesque, drag, country music. I know that sounds silly, but I'm doing something on Louisiana now, Cajun Louisiana, and I was just reviewing. I did a little film work on it too, and I was just reviewing some of the film this afternoon. Matter of fact, and one place I photographed was called the Wolf's Den, which is a honky tonk basically in Marksville, Louisiana, central Louisiana, and so. Talking to a couple of people there, a couple, man and woman couple, and they were talking about that they met at this place, the Wolf's Den, where we were standing 14 years ago, blah, blah, blah. And they were saying, this is just it's kind of a wacky group of people, from the outside. There are all kinds of people there, and they just, some are really down and out and some are not. Anyway, the guy in the couple says, at a certain point, he says, this is like a really nice community here. We know all the people, they know us. There's never any trouble, and people are real good to each other. If someone is down and out, people help them, and and it goes on and on and on, and about that. And to me, it's similar to the country music world. It's similar to the burlesque world, for that matter. The styles are definitely different. People come from different places.
Sure.
But that community thing, I think, is really important to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of Fred Wiseman, the filmmaker.
Yeah.
There's a similar, if you don't mind me saying so, there's a commonality between you and him, I think. Well, I haven't seen all his movies. I know some of them. And a friend of mine used to work with him, so I'd hear stories about him. That's interesting. I never thought of that, but maybe a little bit, yeah. Well, what I was going to say, the commonality is dissolving the distinction between history, doing social history and documentation, and poetry. If you follow me, in other words, trying to put. Does that make sense, or I don't know?
I'm not so much a poet. I don't.
Okay.
Fred might be, but what I know of his work, I don't think of him so much that way. I mean, I think someone like Keith Carter is a poet.
Interesting.
To me, a photographer like that is more of a poet because he touches emotions. He's interested in the emotional side of things. And I am not that way at all, I don't think. I mean, not that I know emotions exist, and I may even have some, but you know what I mean? My life isn't really, I don't think much about that in my work or my life, In fact, if anything, I've frustrated people in relationships because of that, I think, it's just not part of, I think my parents, and their world in New Bedford was just get it done kind of world, They weren't like, if you stopped for a minute, and I had a few incidents when I was a kid, and I just got told to get on with it, essentially. And that's just the way they were. And so I think I've, adopted a lot of that.
Right.
And, but so poetry seems like something else, to me.
Oh yeah. Well, I was using the word poetry in a very. Everybody needs an anchor in life. You, me, just everybody. Anchor made this whole show possible. I'm immensely grateful to them. You too can use Anchor to make your own shows and create your own vision. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Thank you. So I was not using it in the sense of poetic. I was using in the broadest sense, which can encompass, any craft and encompass anything of beauty that, you know what I'm saying? So, and I think that's the sense that Fred Wiseman discusses it. in the sense that, you know, social history is poetry. Documentation is, you know what I'm saying? Not in the sense that the work has to be emotional. That's too narrow. To me, that's too narrow a formulation to say the work has to be emotional. You know, you could have something be very calm and be poetry, and very unemotional and still be poetry, right? I think. I mean,
I don't really know. I'm not. Yeah. I don't think about it much, but one thing I would say that you know, part of why I work the way I do, I think, and you know, is my background and what I'm interested in, but also it's like I don't think I could ever make something up that, or could create something like a painter does, say, like Merkin did, create something that's more interesting than what's already out there. So my role has been, look at a weird thing happening with my ears. They're all plugged up, and I can't hear out of one ear.
Okay.
So I keep moving the phone back and forth. I'm sorry, but
that's fine.
I just can't. So my role, in a way, in all of this, and really I don't think about it that much, but I have thought about this a little. My role is kind of just trying to record what's out there and identify what's interesting. You know, so I'm not creating anything really. I'm just I'm more of an editor.
Interesting.
I see what's out there, and I try to distill it to what's interesting as a photo, and a good photo, and that's it. So a lot of what's happening in contemporary art now is people are staging their photographs and creating their own scenarios and tableaus and you know, so forth and so on. And that doesn't interest me at all.
Right.
And even if it did, I wouldn't be very good at it, I don't think.
Right.
Not that everybody who does it is good, but, you know.
Well, you know, it's, as you know,
I want to be good at it.
But you know, Henry, my taste is so diverse because I have you on my wall and I have Deborah Turbeville on my wall.
Oh, Deborah Turbeville. Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, because I love both. And it's for me, it's not about either or. I mean, of course, they're very... But I think that the commonality is they're both good at what they do and try to do something.
Well, you are too, though, right? I mean, you're a piano player, right? So, I mean, that's all we can do the best we can do, and then you know, I mean, the problem with poetry for me, one problem with poetry for me is so much of it is, you know, I mean, it's true of art too that sometimes people think, oh, I'm an artist, and that makes me, you know, better than someone else. It's like, I mean, I think an artist or a poet or a musician or a plumber or an electrician or a lawyer, they're all the same in a way.
Oh, they're totally the same. Oh, they're totally the same. Yeah,
they're good and not so good, and they're creative ones and not so creative ones. You know, what's more creative than a great lawyer? You know, Clarence Darrow, Jesus.
Yeah, it's pretty
you know, whereas there are artists who aren't creative at all, I think. They just, that's their job description, art, you know, but it isn't necessarily creative.
I mean, I guess
anyway, I don't know if I'm creative or not, but I, you know, creative in the sense that I create stuff.
Absolutely.
But I don't create my subjects. They created themselves.
So is for you, I guess I want to ask you, not to press too hard on this, but is for you that distinction important? In other words, is it, I guess what I'm wondering is it because your subject is found and not created, is that, how much do you make of that distinction? Because, you know.
No, I don't think it matters. I mean, it's who you are. Yeah. You know, I mean, you know, you're not Jerry Lee Lewis, so you'll never play piano like that.
No,
but
although, well.
If you listen to Jerry Lee and his sister, who's also a piano player,
that's right,
and his cousins, Mickey Gilley and Swaggart, and who are also piano players, and they all play the same. I mean, not exactly, but you know, they're the same style and so forth. They came up together. That's how they learned, and that's how we all do, I think, to a degree. We find our community, I guess, our people, and the ones we like, and work accordingly.
Well, you know so much about that music. Do you mind talking a little bit about some of the people you've met?
No, no, no. I love the music, and I think the book that I did was mostly from the 70s.
Yeah,
and
right.
I did a second version of it, and I included a few pictures that were after that. But I think I always thought of the 70s as the time when I was shooting all that stuff, and it was.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also, this pandemic, like a lot of people, I'm just organizing my life and getting my studio in order and this and that. But I'm realizing I've been photographing country music a lot since the 70s, off and on.
Yeah.
But still a lot. And in my next, I'm going to do a Kickstarter next spring, I think.
Excellent.
And I'm going to try to do a book called Honky Tonk Revisited, where I look at honky tonk in a broader way. It would include blues music, and it would include, it would include more landscape, and so forth. Anyway, so I've been, but the difference, I think, and this is typical of the way I work, is I will go to some place, particularly in the early days. I'm a little more strategic now because my time is more limited, and it's expensive, to do a lot of travel and all of that. So I can't just do anything. Right. I have to, be a little bit restrained. But I just go and I find a place and I shoot, and I never really, or I very rarely, I should say, would make an appointment, try to find a particular musician, and go and shoot them. And that's, I think, was a bonus, and it was also a problem. I didn't really photograph people I wish I had, like Johnny Cash and Merle Haggard. I got stage shots, but nothing I never show. So I just would go and shoot, and part of it also was my history background. I wasn't really interested in celebrity. I mean, that's what E.P. Thompson was talking about, the celebrities, the rich people, the politicians, they would get their due anyway.
Yeah.
And the people we should be, as historians, we should be concentrating on is people who won't get their due.
That's
who disappear into history.
That's right.
And and those people are part of the deal, and so they need to be covered. And that's basically what he said. And that was my approach, and still is, when I go out shoot almost anything, even the burlesque, even though the style was a little more abstract, yes, but the intent was very similar to the honky tonk, exactly similar. The only thing I've ever done that really wasn't that was there was the period of 5 or 6 years where I photographed animals and nudes, and those were different, in subject matter. I didn't really care about the social history of the people or the animals, or in fact, I knew very little about animals at that time, except I liked them, but human beings, I was more interested in form and all the things that, Callahan and Siskin and all those guys, Minor White, all those, my teachers kind of taught me. And for me, I think both projects were kind of I was sick of doing what I was doing. I wanted to try something different, and I enjoyed it. And the other thing is that work had a lot more interest from the gallery world, than the other stuff I'd been doing. Documentary work had very little cachet in that world. So I said, oh, that's good. I like the attention.
It's good that you got the attention. It's not so good that there are these divisions and these ideologies. As you know, one of the things I talk about a lot on my show is my frustration with these things. That right? The idea that, you wouldn't show something because it wasn't a self-portrait, or you wouldn't show something because it's historical, or it seems to me totally arbitrary and ridiculous.
Well, I think it's all about career. I mean, it's like if you're a curator, let's say curator, or an older curator, but if you're a young curator, then you're trying to make a career and you're going to hitch your wagon to something.
Yeah.
So, he's the one who, discovered blah, blah, or something.
Yeah.
If you're a generalist, people won't know who you are. So, so people, I can see that. I mean, it's not what I choose to do, but it's like, I can totally see that,
Yeah.
I don't, it's not that I don't care. I do care, but it's like I'm doing what I do as an artist, photographer, whatever you call me, and I'm pretty clear on that. Yeah. And then I have a career as a teacher, and I'm pretty clear on that too. And I have my feelings about teaching, and it's not the same as everyone's, but teachers can, I think, can work in different ways and be successful, and not be successful. So some aren't. So yet, and also I think a lot has to do, in terms of that, a lot has to do with individuals. For example, Aaron Siskin, most people thought he was a better teacher than Harry Callahan. For me, he was not, although I liked both of them and, appreciated them. Aaron's style was more proactive, let's say. He'd poke you and he'd pester you to do this and that, the other thing. He kind of told you what to do. He was very judgmental.
Interesting.
And, sorry, water.
That's fine.
Harry was not. I have a feeling he was probably judgmental in his personal life, but he kept it to himself as a teacher, which I really appreciated, and I try to do. As a teacher too.
Do you mind talking a little bit more about that? Because you're at one of the great schools, RISD, and RISD has this reputation as one of the leading art schools in the United States. And so you might want to talk a little bit about what makes RISD unique, if you're so inclined, and also talk a little bit more about this difference about you as a teacher, because Harry Callahan is a big name, and yet you're talking about styles of instruction. Talk a little bit even more. That fascinates me about what the thing you're talking about.
Well, Harry was the thing that Aaron Siskin, Minor White, and a few other people did, which I think is a little forgotten now, maybe, is they really invented a career. And that career is teaching photography and doing your personal work.
Interesting.
I mean, artists did that all the time, painters or Merkin for that matter, but photographers didn't. Photographers were working people. They were magazine photographers or journalists or fashion photographers or portrait wedding photographers, or, there were categories of medical photographers, industrial photographers. There were categories of photography, but they were all working photographers. And if you look at before the mid-'70s, say, I'm not a photo historian, but almost all the photographers you've ever heard of, Winogrand included, Robert Frank, Dan Arbus, all those people were working photographers. Yeah. Most of them working editorially. Sure. But that's how they made their living. And then suddenly this thing came along, which was the art part, that you could be an artist. By artist, I mean someone who's creating personal work, not assigned work, but work that comes from, from themselves.
Yeah.
And teach to make a living, and produce work that way and maybe get some recognition. And in 1968, when just before I started going to RISD, couple of years before, Harry Callahan was selling his pictures for $25 each.
Mm-hmm.
That was the price, you know. And 1 sec. Hi, Chrissy. Talking to Mitch. Chrissy just walked in. You know, so he was selling his prints at $25 each.
Yeah.
And that's what photography was worth financially, but it was what it was worth to the culture. No one gave a shit, really, you know. And Callahan and Siskin and those people, I don't think it was a mission for them so much as a personal choice, but they, you know, they helped create this job. And by the mid-'70s, all these schools started teaching photography. And so, so there was a job there.
Yeah.
So people who studied, but, 1988 or something, Harry had an opening had a big show and a book from the National Gallery in Washington. And I went down and about 25 other of his students. We didn't have a bus and go down. We all went independently to see the show and to go to the opening. And I have a picture on the wall of that event.
Interesting.
And it's Ed McGowan and Jim Dow and Arno Mitch, and those are some of the people who ended up having very good careers. And but they were all teachers, every one of them.
Yep.
And a lot of them came from my era, and or even before. Dow and Emmett and a couple of others that were there were from the 60s at RISD. So anyway, that's what I think about, and someone ought to write that story, a real historian. But I think that was the real contribution Harry and Aaron made. But the other thing you asked about, and I think I'm going to have to go very soon after, I'm sorry, but we can pick up at another time if you like.
We might have to do episode part 2. But
my voice is dead. An hour is about what I got. So.
That's right.
And but here's the thing. And again, I've had people mad at me about this at RISD. So, but we have very good teachers at RISD. They're quirky, they're varied, but they're very passionate. Everybody I teach with is very passionate about what they do, and they work hard at it, and they do what they're meant to do at a good school or any school. But I think what makes RISD special is the students. We get the best students.
That's right.
I mean, not every one of them, but overall, the level of quality, but also commitment. The kids work all the time. I don't. If there's such a thing as the opposite of a party school, RISD is it. So,
well, that's
and the truth is, I hope they party a little bit. You're supposed to when you're in college, damn it. But they don't really. They work. They're in the studios through the night and weekends, and so and a huge percentage of them, there's always good students everywhere.
Sure.
But virtually everybody at RISD is a good student. So that, it's very easy to be a great teacher when you have great students.
I see.
But I shouldn't say it's very easy, but it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because, it's hard to fail as a teacher. People had said, and I brag about, and I'm about to brag as I go out, but about having Nan Golden as I was her first teacher. And she took 3 classes with me. And, people said, proud of her, this and that, the other thing. There was no way that anybody was going to get in the way of Nan being a successful artist.
Of course.
Because she had it in her,
That's right.
You would have had to beat her down emotionally.
Yeah.
to for her not to succeed, because she was going to do it.
That's
come
right.
hell or high water. And anyway, that's what I got for tonight.
Well, that's
okay.
plenty. I mean,
stuff.
you mentioned ending up talking about Nan Golding, we could do a whole show on Nan Golding. She's phenomenal. I want to thank you so much for your generosity and time, Henry. And
well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And this means a lot. And I wish you safe and health this unusual time as well.
Yeah, same to you. Same to you. So far, so good. You guys okay down there?
Well, we do.
People,
one day at a
people
time.
paying attention?
Yes.
They are good. Yeah, good.
But thank you, Henry. This was a great hour.
Tough times. Yeah. Okay, we'll be in touch. Let me know when you want to go back to it, okay?
That's right. Thank you.
All right. Take care, Mitch.
Okay.